Hello and welcome. How best to share limited vaccine supplies is due to be discussed here in London by foreign ministers from the wealthy G7 nations. There is growing pressure to redistribute stockpiles and know-how with poor countries that are struggling. So far, we've seen more than 49 million vaccine doses delivered through Covax. Now, that's the international program set up to ensure fair access to vaccines. But the WHO leader said back in April that only 0.3% of vaccines administered around the world had gone to people in low-income countries. So far, it's the US that has promised more than $4 billion to Covax, far more than any other country, but it has sidestepped calls to relax international property rules to allow cheaper vaccines. The UK as well has pledged $500 million, but along with other rich nations, there's a question about what happens to vaccines that are surplus to domestic needs. In a sign of the challenges faced by the G7 meeting, it's emerged the Indian delegation is now self-isolating after 2 of its members tested positive. They will now take part in the meeting virtually. Courtney Bembridge reports.
Are wealthy nations doing enough to help poorer countries tackle COVID-19? That's the question being put to G7 foreign ministers who are meeting to consider new ways to ensure fairer access to vaccine stockpiles.
The G7 countries are the world's economic and political leaders. They're also home to many of the world's vaccine producers. We will only solve the vaccine crisis with the leadership of these countries.
6 months into the global vaccine rollout, and only 0.3% of the doses administered around the world have gone to people in low-income countries. Contrast that with the figures we're hearing from the US.
Our goal by July 4th is to have 70% of adult Americans with at least one shot and 160 million Americans fully vaccinated. That means giving close to 100 million shots, some first shots, others second shots, over the next 60 days.
In India, where coronavirus infections are spiralling out of control, less than 10% of the population has had their first jab.
It doesn't make moral sense for majority of people to be in the queue, dying, waiting for a vaccine. But worse still, new variants keep coming. The longer the virus remains anywhere in the world, the more variants come that are resistant to the technology which exists, and then we are back to where we were.
Winnie B. Yanima founded the People's Vaccine, a campaign to remove patent restrictions on COVID-19 vaccines and medicines to allow more countries to manufacture doses. The World Health Organization supports the plan, along with 100 countries led by South Africa and India that are petitioning the World Trade Organization to waive protections on intellectual property. The EU and UK say they'll oppose the move. Critics say the proposal wouldn't solve supply chain delays. Take Pfizer's jab, for example. The company says it needs 280 components from 86 suppliers in 19 countries. So even if you waived the patent, it would take months, if not years, to replicate Pfizer's complex supply chain.
It may actually disincentivise any entity, any commercial entity from getting involved in vaccines. And much and all as we love them or loathe them, the commercial entities have the professional resources to get a vaccine into final use.
The top coronavirus advisor in the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has warned the plan risks backfiring if it leads to long legal disputes. The Biden administration is expected to set out its position at a World Trade Organization meeting on Wednesday. Courtney Bembridge, BBC News.
So much to talk about with our global health correspondent Naomi Grimley, who joins me now. G7 foreign ministers meeting, lots of talk, but is any one country putting forward a proper proposal that would work to start sort of narrowing the gap on vaccines?
The answer to that is no so far. In terms of redistributing excess doses, you've had America give some 4 million to Mexico, a neighbour, and to Canada, a neighbour. But of course, they are sitting on large supplies, including including 60 million doses of that Oxford AstraZeneca, which hasn't actually been approved in the US at the moment. And when it comes to a country like the UK has got in the pipeline access to 517 million doses of vaccine. Now, obviously, that is many more times than it needs to vaccinate its entire population. The only country that has actually sort of put some proposals to Covax so far is France. It's volunteered to give some to West Africa, but again, a tiny amount. We're talking about 500,000 doses, so not very much. It wouldn't really go very far in West Africa.
And overall, Naomi, the world does need more vaccines. We need to produce more. What's happening with the supply chains at the moment?
Well, they're severely disrupted, and this is a big problem because the Serum Institute, the biggest vaccine maker in the world, is obviously situated in India, and they now need to keep those vaccine doses for themselves. And that means that the Covax supply, so this big global project to get vaccines to low and middle income countries, that tap has essentially been turned off. So even a country like Ghana, that was doing quite well getting vaccines into arms, is now finding that there just isn't any vaccine left.
And the other key issue that's being discussed as well, and people have been mentioning this for months, what is going to happen in terms of waiving the patents for some of these vaccines? Any progress there?
So that has obviously gained momentum. You've got the WHO backing it. You've also got, big hitters like Gordon Brown, the former UK Prime Minister, backing it. The big problem there is big Western countries don't like the idea of, IP being watered down, IP protections being watered down. They fear it would be a slippery slope. And that's why that proposal just doesn't seem to be breaking through. And you heard in that piece there that even Dr. Anthony Fauci, who likes to take a global view of things, thinks that it could actually cause more problems than it would solve, particularly with legal battles over vaccines.
OK, Naomi, great to get your thoughts as always.